Hello, everyone. This is Maya, and I'm here with a very exciting guest today with tons of experience in clinical research and precisely in startup, Angie Schwab. Angie Schwab has actually founded EZ Research Solutions, which is a very exciting company that combines startup expertise with AI. And just before we started recording, Angie was telling me how passionate she became about startup, and I can't wait to hear more about the story. So I stopped her there and I said, let's start recording because I want to make sure that everyone can hear this amazing story. But before that, Angie, first of all, welcome. And second, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Absolutely. Maya, thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation. I'd love people passionate about research. I think we've got a lot of fun things to talk about today. A little bit about myself. So, I grew up in Minnesota, did undergrad in Iowa in genetics, grad school in North Carolina in genetic counseling. I wanted to be a clinician. I want to see patients. I want to do research. I want to change
Nice.
the world. You have these grand, sparkling ideas when you're young, and I love that enthusiasm. And from there, I became a clinician. I was seeing patients, I was doing research on the side, and just realized, wow, in order for me to have more of an impact, I need to do more research. I need to not only do my research, I need to help other people do their research. And that's when I became more like a manager and a director of a research department, overseeing many different research studies, probably helped start over 200 clinical trials in
Oh,
my
wow.
timeline. I've been in it, dare I say, 20 years to
Yeah.
date myself. It's been a minute.
You should be proud of it. Come
I
on.
know, I really should. But my passion's always been in the startup. I think if you don't have a good foundation, that study's going to fail. And
Mm,
depending on the statistics that you look at, they say upwards of 80% of clinical trials fail for one reason or another. It's not that they're not successful in proving their outcome, it's they fail. They
yeah.
don't enroll enough patients, they run out of money, they run out of timeline, all of these things. And I would like to help people not do that. Let's
So do,
design intelligent studies from the ground up.
yeah, so tell me, actually, that's very interesting. Do I understand correctly that from your perspective, these clinical trials are failing because of anything related to startup? Or actually, maybe let's go one step back. And can you tell me from your experience, obviously you supported more than 200 clinical trials, what
Mhm.
failed the majority of these clinical trials?
I think it was they weren't well thought out. They didn't think about the participants. They were not realistic about their inclusion, exclusion. They were asking way too much of these participants. The participants were like, "Thanks, but I don't want to come sit in your office for 8 hours." They're not realistic.
Yeah,
I don't think they were realistic about the budgets. Many times you see investigators say, "Oh, great, we're going to have an MRI and a CT and an echo and a like blah blah blah," right? Like they just stack it. They stack all of these tests and procedures in thinking, at least in the US, I can caveat this in the US, they think insurance is going to cover it. And many
mm,
times it doesn't, or they haven't thought that out. And all of a sudden you're into a trial, you're doing all these procedures, and you realize, whoa, why is the department getting these bills for this? And then the
yeah.
department said, I got to bill the sponsor. And the sponsor says, we don't pay for that. So then they said, well, whoa, I can't enroll in your trial because I can't have my patients paying for all of your tests. So
Yeah.
it's really having a lot of things fall through the cracks. And that's why I'm passionate about study startup. If you don't think through these things in the beginning, you are setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah. So if I'm to summarize, if you don't understand the local standard of care, because like all these procedures being done, what's reimbursed, what's not reimbursed, it's
Mhm.
actually key to know what you can expect, the motivations of patients to join your trial, but also to have a predictability over your budget and timelines. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There
So,
are
so,
so many complicated factors that are
mm,
involved in study startup and designing from the beginning. And that's why I really advocate to having all of the study team around the table from day one. It's
mm,
yes, the investigator has a brilliant idea, but as soon as you can get the right people around the table who have these interesting perspectives, you can build that study in a much more robust way from ground up. And then all of your documents trickle out of there. It's not take a document, make another document, make another document, realize you needed to change something in the first document, and have this continual cycle of revisions and documents. So I was like, no, like
Mm.
we need to get away from that. Let's all agree at the study component level and let the documents write themselves.
Angie, I have a question to you. You mentioned that very often these clinical trials fail because of the fundamentals. The fundamentals were not there. So when you are involved in startup, and I want to make an amendment, I've never been a part of startup, like
Okay.
not actively, let's say. So are the what are the what's the possibility of you to impact these fundamentals? Like how often sponsors or the investigators or whoever is working on the protocol that defines that, do they give you the chance to actually think, hey, you need to go back and change that?
Yeah, that's why we are starting from the very beginning, asking the sponsors, the CROs, the investigators themselves to say, bring in your people now. And the way that we do that is by creating, it's a very robust kind of a questionnaire. It's an iterative questionnaire, like design your own adventure kind of thing, right? If you want to do a drug study, I'm going to ask you all these drug questions, but then going to ask you who's paying for that drug? Okay.
Yeah.
What are the tests involved? Who's paying for those tests? So I think the best thing a sponsor and a CRO and an investigator wanting to launch their own research study to do is write out your summary. Decide in general, what do you want to do? And then start pulling in those other resources. So from a sponsor's perspective, what I would think would be fantastic, and some of them are doing it, certainly not all, but they have a theory, and then they're going to bring in a CRO to help them execute on that. That protocol shouldn't be final at that point. That it should be 90%
Mm.
of the way there, but that's when you give the opportunity for the CRO to come in and say, this part, we've seen this in our experience. It's probably not going to work well. It's going to be hard to find these patients at these locations, etc. And then also bring in an investigator. If you think Dr. Johnson in cardiology has done a similar trial, don't be afraid to reach out. Say, we're thinking of a similar type of a trial and enrolling a similar type of participants. I would like your input. And the more we can create this cohesive, collaborative environment, the better all of these trials are going to be. They're going to be more efficient,
Yeah.
cost efficient, time efficient, more realistic, and the participants are hopefully going to be much happier than they are today.
Yeah. But Angie, you mentioned bringing in another investigator that's maybe done something similar. And I totally agree with you. Like someone going through a similar experience can tell you what are the pluses, minuses, what are the, let's say, challenges that you can expect, maybe even
Mhm.
predict and prevent some of them. But what about bringing the patient in as well?
Oh, I
Because
love that.
okay, so for out of these 200 clinical trials, how
Yes.
many did you manage to bring the patient in the right time and get their thoughts out?
Oh, for us, when I was working back in it, we did our best to get perspectives from people. Like we would ask and say, we'll have an upcoming trial about this, but it was never a round table with the patient there to say, this is our proposed
Mm.
schedule. What do you think? Does this seem reasonable? Could you come back every 3 weeks? I love that idea. I think the implementation is a little bit harder to do, but
Mm.
I would love to see that happen.
What makes it harder? What makes it even hard to ask an investigator? Because
Mm,
from what you said, that's not very common to bring another investigator. That's what you're advising. But from what I understand, it's not, let's say, a common practice. So what makes it hard to bring another investigator with the same experience? And then
uh-huh.
what makes it hard to bring a patient to the round table, like you mentioned?
Yeah, I think you have to also be very strategic about your intellectual property.
Mm.
We're in a very high stakes environment where we're creating novel therapeutics, novel drugs, and so you have to be very confident in the people you bring into your table. The CDAs, the NDAs, but usually adding them as investigators. If they did a similar type of research, there may be some conflicts of interest there. So it's just vetting and thinking through all of those things. But I say absolutely, it's worth it. It's worth taking the time. And the patient side of things, I think it honestly doesn't cross our mind that much. As researchers,
Mm.
we're so busy. We're trying to do so many things. We're creating all the forms, we're doing all the things, we're creating, all the submissions and the responses. It's a lot of work. And to be like, Jane is in my mind. I think Jane would be a great candidate for this. When is Jane coming to clinic next? Oh, I should sit and talk to Jane about this. Like the timing and coordinating all of that is a heavy lift. But again,
It's
if
one
you
more
could
thing.
do it,
Yeah, I understand. Truly, and I think most people are convinced of the impact. Most
Mhm.
people. But then like you said, it's one more thing on top of everything else that you need to
Yeah.
do. And it's a
Mhm.
lot. But I hope we find a way and scalable way to actually support investigators, sponsors, whoever, basically, to include the patient at the round table, because you mentioned it, like 90% clinical trials fail. So I
I think
think
the
we
latest I
need to do
saw was
something
upwards of
else.
80. Yeah. But
Yeah,
for
well,
various
yes.
reasons. Yes.
Yeah, of course, of course. And yeah, I wonder from the very beginning when you started mentioning your background, you mentioned this passion to become a researcher, and then you became one. And I wonder, what was the difference between what you expected to be like to be a researcher and what it actually was once you are a researcher?
Again, you have this like pie in the sky. I'll get to work on all the most amazing things and design trials and work with this doctor and that doctor because I have a master's. I'm not a doctor. So my goal was to work with clinicians and to bring these ideas to fruition, right? Like that was my passion. And then you start getting into the bureaucracy.
Mm,
There's limited resources, there's limited time, there's limited access. I liken being a clinical researcher to an entrepreneur. You have so many chips stacked against you from day one. You have to literally peel away every single one to try to get at that dream trial that you have or that dream business that you have. And it's going to take effort and it's going to take networking, and you have to find a way to be incredibly resourceful. One of the biggest issues that most investigators face is not knowing how to find funding and
of
knowing that
course.
there are sponsors out there that may love to help you with your research study. There may be universities that would love to help you. There may be nonprofits, and if you're lucky enough to get a government grant, that would be wonderful. But going through all of those channels, it's a really heavy lift.
Interesting. And then you decided to focus on startups. So I wonder, like I
Yeah.
said, I don't have that like hands-on experience with startup, like with the stage of the clinical trial. So tell me, what
Mhm.
got you excited about startup? But
Yeah.
also, actually, let's start with what got you excited, and then I have a follow-up question.
I think it was all the challenges. For some reason, like it may not be very bright thing to do, but I love to run towards the problems, not away. And I was like, okay, like if we develop this from the ground up, it's going to be more successful. Like I don't want to keep seeing and putting all my life's effort into studies that continue to fail and don't have the outcomes that they want. Like I could literally consider that wasted lifetime. And
Mm,
if we can build it better from the beginning, then my life hopefully isn't wasted on
yeah.
trials that go nowhere. So that's where I became passionate. Like, let's solve some problems.
I can see that you're literally going after the bureaucracy problem, exactly the thing that you didn't like. You are actually fighting it to make it better, so other people are way more let's say, other people that dream of becoming a researcher, they find it way more
Yes.
attractive.
Yes.
Nice. I
Yes.
love
And
that.
I actually built that into Easy Docs as well. So we have a very easy, intuitive platform for new researchers to come in and build your study. So it's not grab this template, change this info, grab that template, change that info. And you do that 30 times in all these different
Yeah.
forms. It's let me help you think through your study. Let's take a step
Mm,
back, answer the questions. Let's think through how are you designing your study. I'm going to ask you questions you never even thought about, but it's going to prompt you and give you ideas of things you should be thinking about so that you're not one of that 80% that fails.
yeah. This reminds me, Angie, of one of my experiences lately, maybe last year. We created, like as part of my company, we created like this Gen AI solution. that can empower you to ask questions proactively. And then we thought that because this saves you so much time on researching, people
Yes.
will be proactively asking for things around patient feasibility. Why would patient join a trial? What would motivate them? What would be the barriers for recruitment and stuff like that? Only to find out that actually people are not necessarily, they don't necessarily know what are these questions. And that there's so many questions they need to ask. So like you said, even in startup, maybe sometimes you haven't even thought about these, the questions that you should be asking and making sure that you are bulletproof. Clinical trial protocol with your feasibility, execution plan, and so on and so forth. Very interesting. Angie, tell me more about the challenges that you face with startup. And then my next question would be, you mentioned Easy Research Solutions, the platform that you have.
Yeah.
It'd be also very interesting how many, which of these challenges you're directly addressing with your company now, and what's the role of AI?
Yes. So the challenges for me that I saw in study startup is number one, not well thought out. You're not answering all the questions you need to, you're not thinking through it. You are getting surprised more often than not, and not in a good way. As
Yeah.
you launch and you do your first patient, you realize things went sideways and now you've got to do amendments, and it's just really hard. And especially for a new investigator, it's a really, really heavy lift to get that first research study done. So, how I wanted to solve that is create a platform that's collaborative where all of the experts can come in and answer the questions with you, review it with you. You could seriously sit in a table, have an hour-long session with people and say, hey guys, what do you think about this? How many participants should we
Nice.
do? What are our primary and secondary objectives? How are we going to manage this? How much time will it take? Like, you go through all of that with your team. That's where you hash everything out. You should be hashing it out before you launch and get your first patient in and see how it goes. So that's what I built into Easy Docs. And then from there, I wanted to tackle this issue of data reuse. So much manual data time. We actually worked with a university lately looking at Easy Docs. The thing is, people don't understand how much time they're spending on these documents. They're like, don't
Mhm.
worry, I have a template. But yeah, you have a template. You're still spending 25 hours crafting that document based on your directions in your template. And that's one document. And then you go to the next document and the next document and the next document just to create like the basic of your study design, your protocol, your consent form, to get your legal on board, your finance people, your operations team, and your investigators. You really are looking at over 250 hours at like the
Okay.
least. Most people tell me I way underestimate that for an
Oh,
investigator
wow.
initiated university study. And with ours, we've been able to save almost 200 hours because now you're
Wow.
just answering the questions, the documents create themselves, you proof the documents. It's just very simple, very fast. And
Fascinating.
I would love to see more people use it. Like, that's where we're at right now. I want to help more researchers do more research.
That actually reminds me of another question. I know that in your past, like you mentioned beforehand, that you've supported both investigator-initiated clinical
Mhm.
trials, but also sponsor-led clinical
Yep.
trials. Is there a difference between the way they are doing, like they're planning on their next clinical trial? Is it fair to say
Mhm.
the sponsors are way more prepared? They have these, let's
Mm.
say, preparation with all these questions because let's say they're doing a lot more research,
Mhm.
or you've seen the very same mistakes that investigators are doing for their own clinical trials with sponsors as well.
Yeah. You see the same mistakes, however, the stakes are much higher, right? If you're
Exactly.
taking
Yeah.
a big pharma company, they're putting many more research resources at this to try to prevent that. But I've absolutely seen them fail for the
Um,
exact same reasons. I'll give you a specific example. It was a cardiology study that I had taken part in, and we knew it didn't work well because one of the things is you had to catch them before they were cardiac patients. However, you were enrolling them in cardiac clinics or looking for the patients in cardiac clinics. That doesn't make any sense. You have to hit them in primary care, right? So, but that was the team, is the cardiologists were the ones passionate about it, so they were trying to enroll from their area. So it's just thinking through the operations and the feasibility. And this was a very large multi-site study. Actually, it was an international study. And it was like, let's just think through this for a second. So the same mistakes are happening.
Mm.
Which is sad. On the bright side, though, ICH M11 guidelines for the protocol are coming out soon. So they released guidance documents saying, okay, this is what I think like the final protocol suggestions are going to look like. Hopefully that's released at the end of 2024, depending on when you hear this. And at that case, we really all should be playing by the same rules. Like all of our documents should all look the same, whether you are a sponsor doing a prospective study or investigator initiated. You should be thinking through all of the same aspects because when it comes down to it, it's about patient safety. It's about doing a good trial. It's about taking care of your patients and hopefully having a good outcome so that you can actually test your hypothesis.
Mm. And I understand your focus on the documents, but then again, with your example, for example, it's very interesting because I've heard these stories. I hear these stories all the time.
Yes.
For example, looking for a breast cancer patient before any treatment, and looking for such a patient with the oncologist who is actually the person that gives you the first line treatment and not the one that diagnoses you. So,
Right.
like in country, and that varies country by country. So that
Yeah.
happens all the time. And I'm like, I understand the documents and the documentation is super important,
Mhm.
but they're only a reflection of your initial research. And in this case, understanding the local specific patient pathway,
Yes.
understanding their country specific standard of care, access to treatment, access to procedures, and at what
Mhm.
stage they become eligible, at what stage they may be more motivated to join your clinical trial, and then getting this research, not only that, but also like all the regulatory frameworks and so on and so forth, and translate that into your trial documentation. That just makes sense.
Yes. There are so many hiccups along the pathway that people need to think through, and sponsors specifically, especially if you're doing international study, the level of complexity just got ramped up, tenfold.
Exactly.
And like you were saying, the care pathway is different. And I would even say international, the care pathway is different clinic to clinic in the same city. How we treat our patients can be very different no matter who the treating clinician is. So we have to think through who are our investigators, who are our sites. Does it actually make sense? And that's where you would want to come in and create a very good like schedule of activities and think through the site
Mm.
burden. So as you're going through feasibility, that's another big part of the study startup process is site feasibility. So whether you're on the receiving end or the side of trying to find your sites, actually sit down with them and have a conversation. It's not, here's a schedule. How does it look? Here's a budget. Here we go. Everybody, okay, sign the document. Great. Now here we go. But actually have a conversation. This is how
Mm.
we anticipate the study to go. This is the schedule. Does this work in your clinic? Is this when you see the patient? Is this when you do these tests? Does this make sense? Do you actually even see these patients? That should be number one.
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. Especially when you're asking someone for like their advice and feedback. Do you get to see these patients? Wow. Angie,
Yeah.
I wanted to once again ask you about the role of AI
Yes.
because you always speak is about automation,
Yes.
reducing this manual work. And I
Yes.
would also add to what you're saying. I understand that you're saving a huge amount of hours, but
Hmm.
I would add, and I'm assuming, but that you can actually tell me if I'm wrong. I assume that you're not only saving a bunch of hours, but you're also saving a bunch of manual mistakes. Because let's face
Absolutely.
it, we are humans and it's normal to make mistakes, especially when you work hundreds of hours on multiple documents, missing something, saying it differently, and so on and so forth. So it's not just the saving hours, it's also saving the mistakes. So what is the role of AI? And where do you see the future of startup?
Yeah. I would actually take those as two separate things. I'm so glad you brought that
They
up
are.
because doing the automation really drastically reduces. So imagine you're now entering in, I have 150 patients, and then you create all 30 documents that have 150 patients in 27 different spots, right? And the chance of you manually entering in accidentally 151 in that one spot, and it goes to the IRB and it gets kicked back and delaying you, it's likely. This happens all the time. We are humans. So yes, I do think automation has a huge opportunity there to increase the compliance as well. You're also putting it into templates that are standardized, and you're using expert crafted language. You're not trying to create all of this yourself, which is such a uphill battle for especially new investigators who don't have that done. So I lean very heavily into automation right now, and EasyDocs is predominantly automation right now. But with that
Mhm.
caveat said, I also saw a great statistic that said AI's capabilities are doubling every 6 months. And so we're certainly adding in AI components, which gives you suggested language. We're not having AI write all of your documents right now, because I honestly think that's a big mistake. AI is not ready right now. AI can provide some suggestions that you would need to review, but these are highly regulated documents that need to be perfect. You should not just say, hey, write my protocol about cardiomyopathy and blah, 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 write a research protocol and think it's going to come out looking good. It does not. Please do not make that mistake of making any regulatory documents with AI right now. That being said, this is, as we're taping it, July 2024. And as I said, AI doubles every 6 months. Things are going to change. But how I incorporate AI is specifically that, giving suggestions. Okay, how would I craft this section of a paragraph, etc. I think it's really helpful to give you
Yeah.
ideas and to do an initial draft for you. Right now, it's not ready to create all the documents. But talk
Mhm.
to me in 6 months, we're going to have a very different conversation.
Okay, I'm gonna take this advice. I'm gonna talk to you in 6 months.
Uh-huh.
Just joking. Where do you see the future of startup in general? I mean, we
Oh,
AI is just an instrument. Let's not forget that.
yes, that's right.
But where do you see the future of the startup for clinical trials? Are you expecting? You already mentioned some regulations coming up,
Yes.
so that also influence like this area. But like, what's your overall feeling? And if not a feeling, where do you want to see startup going?
Yeah. So not only startup, but the entire clinical trials is moving digital. And I don't think
Mm,
a lot of
okay.
people recognize that yet, but Transcelerate, which is a very large nonprofit that helps push the entire industry forward, they have a digital protocol initiative. So they're recognizing this. Sponsors are recognizing that we need to quit pulling information out of documents and manually entering it into other documents. This is just uh
Yeah.
it's so outdated. It's yeah. So I think
Middle age.
everyone's on the same
Yeah.
page of realizing we need a better way to do this, and the way to do that is to create these digital components. But the benefits of that are not just, yay, we write your documents, but it's also all the downstream effects. So let's
Uh,
say you create your schedule of activities, it's digital. Now it can go into your CTMS, it can go to your ETMF, it can go into everything downstream that you need to have. And you, once again, don't have to retype it and re enter it into all of those systems. You know, there's one source of truth at the very beginning of that trial. And if you change that source of truth, everything trickles down after that. So I see this becoming much more integrated very, very quickly. I'm seeing sponsors decide that this manual way of doing it and paying very intelligent people many, many hours of work to draft documents is not going to continue. I see automation coming in a lot more. I see AI coming in a lot more. I also see the entire world is coming together. So ICH, as I said before, alluded to, is with their M11 protocol and creating these kind of standardized templates in a way. Now it's not, okay, there's a template for England and there's a template for France and a template for the US. It's no, we should all be talking the same language because we're all doing international
oh,
trials.
amen.
And we're all here for the same reason. So I
That's
think
right.
that is really going to catapult our industry forward. I'm a big proponent of standardization. I The sky's the limit right now. I think this is really an inflection point for research. Also, as you
It
look
is.
into biotech, I mean, the economy has been pretty rough for a lot of people. I think we
Mhm.
can admit that the last several months in particular, and lots of layoffs. And if I was to give any advice to people out there right now, use your network, start realizing the power of AI, because
Yeah.
the old way of doing things is very, very quickly becoming the old way. And if you don't know how to properly harness AI and automation and do things smarter and faster and more consistently, it's going to be a detriment. And that's my 2 cents of the day.
Thank you for sharing like this vision, and it makes a lot of sense. And I really hope you're right because we need this standardization, like you mentioned. Whether that's feasible, it doesn't depend on technology. We all agree. It's not about that. I think it's about time the industry to understand that all we need is better collaboration. Because
Yes.
at the end, we don't have anything to divide. Yeah, maybe some like who owns the innovation, who owns the patent, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, there is plenty of room for innovation, for new treatments, for like the market is like, come
Yes.
on, healthcare market is enormous. So
Yes.
it's really time to get together, collaborate, use what's available, because like you said, AI is growing. Uh, it's evolving constantly, but also cost of AI is decreasing constantly. So
Absolutely.
that's already scalable. That's already scalable. Let's leverage that, and um, let's really. I very much like people like you, Angie, who find their passion in a niche, in a place where they have the expertise and they know they can contribute. So thank you for doing that. And if you can share the regulation that you mentioned that you're expecting, I will include
Oh,
that in
sure.
the episode. I'll also include the link to Easy Docs. I didn't realize
Yes.
that easy comes from easy. How cool is
Yeah.
that? But thank you so much
Yeah.
for sharing your thoughts with me, Angie. And it was a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Maya. I really appreciate it. And yes, I would love to collaborate with people. This is a time for innovation and working together. Feel free to reach out to us. Our website is easyresearchsolutions.com. The platform that can help you create your documents is EasyDocs. You can contact us through that form. You can book a demo on there. But I would love to
Nice.
collaborate with businesses, universities, and sponsors. Looking forward to the future.
Yeah, well, I love this energy. So everyone should try it out at least like once.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you, Angie.
Great. Have a great day.